The echo of shadows. The air in the archive was cold, a musty scent of yellowed paper and long-forgotten secrets. Elias Gorn pulled his worn tweed jacket tighter around him and coughed softly. He hated archives. He hated the silence, broken only by the rustle of pages or the faint hum of fluorescent lights. But even more, he hated the relentless emptiness in his stomach, a constant companion since the last case had pushed him to the brink. He wasn't the man he once was, the brilliant profiler whose instincts were as sharp as a razor. Now he was just a shadow of his former self, buried under stacks of files that no one else wanted. His gaze fell upon the file before him. Case Nightjar. An old cold case, almost 30 years old, assigned by his former mentor, Detective Inspector Henderson, who probably wanted to get rid of him more than give him a real chance. Murder of a young woman, Alice Moreau, a student, found in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of London. No witnesses, no traces, just an intricately carved wooden bird, a nightjar, placed beside her body. The case had never been solved. Elias flipped through the thin pages, police reports, witness statements, all leading nowhere. The usual suspects, a jealous boyfriend, a shady professor, were quickly ruled out. The file was a graveyard of hopes, a monument to past failures. He rubbed his temples. He felt the familiar weariness creeping into his bones, the kind of exhaustion that no night's sleep could banish. It wasn't just physical, it was an exhaustion of the soul. Suddenly, his gaze stumbled upon a handwritten note, clipped to one of the last pages. It wasn't an official note, more like a scribble, almost illegible, in a shaky hand. The shadow flies by night. Beware the echo. Elias frowned. This wasn't part of the official investigation. It looked like a personal note, perhaps from one of the original investigators. He unclipped the note and held it up to the sparse light. The shadow flies by night. Beware the echo. What could it mean? A child's game? A clue that was overlooked? He felt the first spark of interest, tiny but present, like a flicker in a decaying campfire. This case was different. There was something the original investigators had missed, something not in the official reports. He switched on the old computer in his corner and began typing the names and dates from the file into the search engine. Alice Moreau, Nightjar, London, 1997. He expected nothing. Cold cases were rarely cold because the solution was obvious. They were cold because the trail was lost, the evidence destroyed, the memories faded. But then a hit. A small article in a local online newspaper dated the year after Alice Moreau's death. Another murder, similar circumstances. A young artist, Sarah Jenkins, found in an abandoned studio, also with a carved wooden bird, this time an owl. And the same mysterious note, handwritten, on a business card in her pocket. The shadow flies by night. Beware the echo. Elias felt the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. This was no coincidence. 2 murders, almost identical signatures, separated by a year, yet connected by this cryptic message. Why had this never appeared in Alice Moreau's original file? Had the investigators missed the connection? Or had they deliberately ignored it? He remembered Henderson's words, "It's a thankless case, Elias. Let it be." Had that been a warning? He delved deeper. He researched Sarah Jenkins' case. The similarities were striking. Both women were young, creative, at the beginning of their lives. Both were found in abandoned, remote locations. And both had these carved birds beside them. It was a signature, a cruel calling card. But what did the echo mean? He Googled, "The shadow flies by night, beware the echo." And this time, there were more hits, many more. It was an old English folk song, a lullaby, macabre. "Sleep, my child, the shadow comes swiftly. The shadow flies by night. Its echo will find you." Elias shivered. Was the killer an artist who drew inspiration from old songs? Or was it something more personal? He contacted Detective Inspector Henderson. His voice was hoarse as he dialed his former mentor's number. "Henderson, it's Thorne. I'm working on a cold case. Alice Moreau. Did you ever look into the Sarah Jenkins case? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Thorne, Henderson finally said, his voice sounding strangely tense. I thought I gave you an easy case. Let the past rest. The past doesn't rest when it involves murders that were never solved, Elias countered. The note, Henderson, the handwritten note in the file. The shadow flies by night. Beware the echo. Did you know about it? Silence again, then a sigh. Thorne, I can't tell you everything. There are things best left unsaid. Not if it means a killer is walking free, Elias retorted sharply. What do you know, Henderson? Who is the shadow? And what is the echo? Henderson cleared his throat. Meet me tomorrow morning at the old pub, the Whispering Willow. I'll tell you what I can. But be careful, Elias. You're stirring up something dangerous. The call ended, and Elias stared at his phone. Dangerous. The word echoed in his ears. He'd faced dangerous cases, met dangerous people. But Henderson's tone was different. It wasn't the usual warning about the cruelty of human nature, but a deeper, more personal concern. He left the archive, the note in his pocket, the lullaby in his head. The cold London night enveloped him. He knew he'd stumbled into something far beyond an unsolved murder case. The echo of shadows was beginning to whisper, and Elias was ready to listen. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, typical for London in July. Elias met Henderson at the Whispering Willow, a pub so old its walls seemed to hold stories no one wanted to hear anymore. Henderson sat at a table in a dark corner, his face obscured by shadows, a cup of tea before him, untouched. Thanks for coming, Henderson, Elias said as he sat opposite. Henderson just nodded. I told you to let this case rest, Elias. Why don't you listen to me? Because it's my job to catch murderers, Henderson, not to hide from them. Henderson sighed. The Moreau case was more complicated than it seemed. Much more complicated. He took a sip of tea and set the cup down with a trembling hand. We had a suspect back then, a strong suspect, but we couldn't prove anything. And then the Jenkins case happened, and suddenly it was like the thread snapped. Who was the suspect? Elias asked directly. A man named Julian Vance, an art student, very intelligent, but disturbed. He was obsessed with occult symbols, ancient myths, especially shadow figures and the echoes of the past. Elias remembered the lullaby. The shadow flies by night. Its echo will find you. Exactly, Henderson said. We interviewed him. He was eloquent, frighteningly calm. He denied everything. He nearly drove us mad with his philosophical theories about the nature of death in art. And the carved birds? He was a gifted wood sculptor, had a small studio where he carved these macabre figures, birds of the night, owls, nightjars, ravens. He called them his messengers from the shadow world. But you couldn't prove anything? Henderson shook his head. Alibis. Perfect alibis for both murders. And he had a powerful lawyer, one of the best in the country, pulled him out of every tight spot. Do you remember the note? The handwritten note in Moreau's file? Henderson nodded slowly. I found it after the case was filed away, Elias. It wasn't in the original police file. I believe it was added later, by someone who wanted it to be found. Who? That's the question, Elias. It was Vance's handwriting. I'm sure of it. But how did it get into the file? And why only so late? Did Vance kill more people? Henderson hesitated. There were rumors, unconfirmed reports of similar murders in other cities, always with these birds, but there was never enough evidence to establish a connection. Where is Vance now? Henderson's face contorted. That's the trickiest part, Elias. Julian Vance died 2 years ago in a fire at his apartment, ruled an accident, a faulty heater. Elias' stomach clenched. A coincidence or a cover-up? And the evidence? The carved birds? The notes? All burned. With him. Or so we were told. Henderson looked directly at Elias. That's why I advised you to leave this case alone. The shadow is dead, Elias. The echo is silenced. But I don't think that's true, Elias. The shadow might be dead, but the echo resonates louder than ever. What if Vance wasn't the killer? Elias said calmly. What if he left the note to lead us on the right track, to warn us about the real killer? Henderson shook his head. That's too far-fetched, Elias. Vance was a psychopath. He was the culprit. I don't believe you, Henderson, Elias said calmly. I think Vance was a victim, or a tool. He stood up. Thanks for the tea, and for the warning.
He left the pub, the feeling of threat now palpable. If Vance wasn't the killer, then who? And why was his death covered up as an accident? The story of the old lullaby echoed in his head. The shadow flies by night. Its echo will find you. The echo. What if the echo wasn't just a metaphor, but something real? A copycat? Or someone who continued Vance's deeds after he died? His next stop was the old police station where the original investigations had been conducted. He still knew some of the old-timers there. Maybe someone knew more. But he had to be careful. Henderson hadn't told him everything. He could feel it. And there was a reason for that. He met with Detective Sergeant Miller, an old colleague who was close to retirement and whose memories were still sharp. Miller had worked on both cases, Moreau and Jenkins. Vance? Yes, I remember that nutcase, Miller said when Elias asked him about the case. They sat in an empty briefing room that smelled of cold coffee and stale cigarettes. A genius, but with a screw loose. We were all sure it was him. But the evidence wasn't enough, Elias said. No, Miller confirmed. He always had alibis, and his lawyers were like hyenas, tore apart everything we presented. The note in Moreau's file? Did you see it? Miller frowned. The note? No, I don't recall a note. The shadow flies by night. Beware the echo. Vance's handwriting. Miller shook his head. I went through all the documents in that case, Elias. There was no such note. If it had been there, we would have noticed it. That would have been a crucial clue. Elias felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Henderson had lied, or he had added the note only after the official archiving. But why? And why would Vance leave it if he was the perpetrator, or if he himself was a victim? And the fire at Vance's apartment? Was that really an accident? Miller hesitated. Officially, yes, but there were rumors. Vance had enemies. He was active in the art scene, and not everyone liked his extreme artistic views. He was often involved in disputes. Enemies who wanted to kill him? Possibly. He had a knack for provoking people, especially the powerful ones. I had an idea. Are there still recordings of the interrogations with Vance, or his court file? Miller nodded. Should all be in the archive, but I doubt you'll find anything we missed. Elias spent the rest of the day in the archive, this time with a clearer goal. He found Julian Vance's interrogation transcripts, and he found them. The same shaky handwriting, the same cryptic messages, only they weren't clipped to the file, but scribbled on the margins of some of his statements. They were hidden clues that only a keen eye could spot. Vance had mocked the investigators, given them clues they couldn't or wouldn't recognize. He read Vance's statements over and over again. Vance spoke of shadows, of echoes, of the transience of life and eternal art. But between the lines, Elias read something else. He spoke of a true master who pulled the strings, of a symphony of death that was not yet finished. Vance wasn't a naive psychopath who simply killed. He was a puppet, a tool, and the true puppeteer was still out there, and he was still playing his macabre game. He also found the court documents, and in one of the statements from Vance's lawyer, a smooth, slick man named Arthur Finch, Elias stumbled upon a name that sounded familiar. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a renowned psychologist who had prepared an expert opinion on Vance's mental state as part of the defense. She was the one who diagnosed Vance as a paranoid schizophrenic, leading to his release due to lack of evidence. Elias knew Dr. Reed. She was a highly respected authority in her field, but he also knew she had a peculiar fascination with the darker sides of the human psyche. Was it possible she knew more than she admitted, or was she perhaps even involved in the events? He decided to visit Dr. Reed. Without an appointment, he needed answers, and he would get them.
Dr. Evelyn Reed's practice was located in an elegant Victorian building in the heart of Mayfair. The atmosphere was subdued, calming, the soft classical music in the background and the subtle scent of sandalwood. Elias felt the contrast to the musty archives and the rough pub momentarily unnerve him. The receptionist, an older woman with a severe bun and an even sterner gaze, informed him that Dr. Reed had no available appointments. Elias put on his best "I'm a cop and this is urgent" look. "It's about an old case, the Julian Vance case," he said. "I'm Detective Thorne." He showed his expired ID. The name Julian Vance seemed to elicit a strange reaction from the receptionist. An almost imperceptible stiffness flitted across her face before she regained her professional composure. "Please wait a moment, Detective. I'll see if Dr. Reed can see you." After a short wait, which felt like an eternity, Elias was led into Dr. Reed's office. It was a spacious room, filled with books, artworks, and a large, elegant desk. Dr. Reed herself sat behind it, a slender, middle-aged woman with piercing blue eyes and an expression that was both intelligent and inscrutable. "Detective Thorne," she said, her voice calm and controlled. "A surprise. I thought the Vance case was long closed." "I thought so too, Doctor. But there's new information. I came across a note in the file that appears to be Vance's handwriting. 'The shadow flies by night. Beware the echo.'" Dr. Reed placed her fingertips together. "Ah, that note. Yes, Julian had a fondness for such cryptic utterances. He was a master of metaphors. Do you believe he was the killer, Doctor?" A hint of hesitation flitted across her face. Julian was a complex man, marked by a deep psychological disorder. He lived in his own world, a world full of symbols and dark meanings. But was he capable of killing? In a certain state, yes. When the boundaries between reality and delusion blur, people can be capable of things they would never imagine in a sober state. You diagnosed him as a paranoid schizophrenic. Did you prepare that report impartially? A faint smile played on her lips. "I am a professional expert witness, Detective. My diagnoses are based on objective observations and clinical criteria." "And what about the echo Vance spoke of? Was that part of his delusion, or did it have a deeper meaning for him?" Dr. Reed looked at him thoughtfully. "The echo. For Julian, the echo was the continuation of his art. He believed that his art would live on even after his death through those who were inspired by his vision. He often spoke of his symphony never ending. A symphony of death." Dr. Reed nodded slowly. "In a way, yes. He saw death as a form of the highest art." I felt a growing unease. "What about his death, Doctor? The fire in his apartment. Was that ever fully investigated?" Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "It was ruled an accident, a tragic short circuit. Do you believe that?" She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the busy street. "In my profession, one learns that coincidences are rare, Detective, and that the truth is often more complex than it appears." She turned back to him. "Why are you so concerned about this case, Detective? Vance is dead. The murders have stopped." "Have they really, Doctor?" Elias leaned forward. "What if the echo hasn't been silenced? What if someone else is continuing Vance's work, or has continued it?" A shadow flitted across her face. "That's a disturbing thought, Detective, but without evidence, it's pure speculation." "I have evidence, Doctor. The note. The connections between the cases, and the fact that Henderson tried to stop me from investigating." Dr. Reed was silent for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "There was another artist who was very close to Julian, one of his students. Her name was Seraphina Dubois. She was just as obsessed with his theories about art and death, perhaps even more so than he was. Elias felt a rush of adrenaline, a new name, a new lead. Where can I find Serafina Dubois? She hesitated. I don't know exactly. She disappeared after Julian's death, had become very reclusive, but I heard that for a while she lived in a remote artists' community in the Scottish Highlands, a kind of commune for artists who isolated themselves from the world. Do you have an address? She shook her head. I only heard it was called The Refuge, a place for lost souls seeking salvation in art. Thank you, Doctor, Elias said, standing up. You've been very helpful. She smiled faintly. I hope you find what you're looking for, Detective, but I warn you, sometimes it's better not to awaken certain echoes. Elias left the practice feeling that he was on the trail of a mystery far greater than he could have imagined. Serafina Dubois, a student of Julian Vance, a woman who shared his morbid artistic views. Was she the echo, or was she another victim? He knew he had to go to Scotland, and he knew he had to find the truth about Julian Vance's death.
The journey to the Scottish Highlands was long and arduous. Elias rented an off-road vehicle that didn't do much on the unpaved roads. The fog hung low. The landscape was barren and wild, a perfect backdrop for secrets and hidden truths. After hours of driving, on increasingly smaller and unpaved roads, he finally reached a small remote village. The locals were taciturn and suspicious. To his questions about the refuge or Serafina Dubois, he received only head shakes or dismissive glances. It seemed no one wanted to talk about the artists' community. Finally, he found an old woman herding sheep, her face weathered and her eyes as clear as mountain stream water. She looked at him for a long time before speaking. "The refuge," she said, her voice rough from the wind, "that's no place for strangers, and certainly not for policemen." "I'm not a policeman on duty anymore," Elias said. "I'm looking for the truth, a woman named Serafina Dubois. I believe she's in danger." The old woman eyed him skeptically. "Some truths are better left hidden, young man, especially those that lie in shadow." She pointed a gnarled finger at a path winding up the hill. "Follow that path, but be warned. The refuge is not what it seems." Elias followed the path. It led him through dense forests, over rocky streams, and finally to a clearing. There it stood, a cluster of wooden huts, rustic yet with a peculiar artistic aura. Smoke rose from some of the chimneys. It seemed peaceful, but Elias felt an underlying tension, a lurking presence. As he approached the huts, he noticed strange sculptures in the forest, abstract forms carved from tree trunks reminiscent of human figures, distorted and stylized. And then he saw it. One of the sculptures was a gigantic wooden bird, an owl, its eyes fixed and empty, as if watching him. A shiver ran down his spine. He walked towards one of the huts. The door was ajar. A faint sound emanated from inside, a rhythmic tapping, like a chisel on wood. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, filled with the smell of wood shavings and something else, something heavy, metallic. The walls were covered with sketches and drawings. Unfinished sculptures stood everywhere. And in the middle of the room, bent over a workbench, sat a woman. Her back was to him, her hands moving deftly over a piece of wood. Her long, dark hair fell over her shoulders. The rhythmic tapping ceased as she noticed his presence. Slowly she turned around. Her face was narrow, her eyes large and dark, almost black. And in her hands she held a small, finished wooden bird, a nightjar. "Serafina Dubois?" Elias asked softly. "You found me, detective. The echo led you here." Her voice was soft, almost fragile, but beneath the surface Elias felt an icy coldness. "I'm here about Julian Vance, and about the murders of Alice Moreau and Sarah Jenkins." A faint smile played on her lips. "Julian was a visionary. His art was misunderstood, but his message lives on. You continued the murders, didn't you?" She laughed, a soft melodious sound that chilled Elias to the bone. "Continued? Oh no, detective. I perfected them. Julian merely sowed the seeds. I reaped the harvest. Elias felt a coldness settle within him. She wasn't the echo. She was the true shadow. You killed Julian, didn't you? Caused the fire to erase all traces? Her smile vanished. An expression of cold fury replaced it. Julian grew weak. He wanted to stop. He didn't understand the lullaby. He didn't understand the meaning of the echo. The art must be completed, no matter the cost. What is the meaning, Serafina? What is the echo? She held up the nightjar in her hand. The echo is the memory of the beauty of death. It is the continuation of art through those who are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. Julian chose the victims. I created the art. She moved suddenly, faster than Elias had expected. Her hand darted towards a wooden sculpture on the workbench. It was a razor, intricately integrated into the handle of a carved bird. Elias reacted instinctively. He ripped an old blanket from the chair and threw it over Serafina before she could reach him. She cried out, a shrill, bird-like shriek. The razor clattered to the floor. Elias struggled with her, but she was surprisingly strong for her delicate frame. Her eyes glowed with a wild, maniacal gleam. She bit and scratched, trying to hit him with anything she could get her hands on. Finally, he managed to pin her against the wall and fix her arms behind her back. She trembled all over, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. You won't stop me, detective. The echo will continue to fly. There are others who share my vision. The symphony will go on. Who are the others, Serafina? Elias asked, holding her tight. She laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. You'll find out soon enough, detective. The echo is everywhere. He pulled out his handcuffs and put them on her. Her resistance gave way to a strange resignation. She stared at him with her dark eyes, an expression of madness and triumph in her gaze. He led her out of the hut. The air outside was cold and clear. The wooden burns in the forest seemed to watch them silently. He knew he had caught Serafina Dubois, but he also felt that this was just the beginning. If the echo was truly everywhere, as Serafina claimed, then there was much more to discover. He called the local police. They were surprised but cooperative. Serafina Dubois was led away. Elias stood alone in the clearing, surrounded by the carved birds, silent witnesses to Serafina's cruelties. What had she meant when she said there were others? Who were the disciples of the shadow? He knew he had to return to London, and he had to find out what Henderson hadn't told him. And Dr. Reed, was there a deeper connection between all of them? The case that began as a cold case had turned into a nightmare that went far beyond the initial murders. The Echo of Shadows was not just a title. It was a warning, and Elias Thorne was right in the middle of it.
Back in London, Elias contacted Henderson again. He was angry. You knew, didn't you, Henderson? You knew Vance wasn't the killer, that Serafina Dubois was the real culprit. Henderson was silent for a while on the phone. Then he said softly, "Yes, Elias, I had a suspicion, but there was no evidence. And Serafina was too clever. She left no traces. And Julian Vance, he was the perfect scapegoat. Why didn't you warn me?" "Because I wanted you to find the truth, Elias. I knew you were the only one who would dig deep enough. I couldn't risk involving others who weren't ready for it." "And why did you smuggle the note into the file?" "I found it in Vance's things after he died. I knew it was a key. I put it in the file, hoping someone would find it who was willing to pursue it. Someone like you." Elias felt a mixture of anger and respect. Henderson had manipulated him, yes, but for a reason that was now clear. "Serafina said there are others, disciples of the shadow. What do you know about them?" Henderson sighed. "That's the part that worries me most, Elias. Vance had gathered a kind of cult around him, young artists who were fascinated by his theories. He called them his students of the shadow. Did Dr. Reed know them?" "She counseled some of them as patients.
She was his psychologist, but she was also fascinated by his dark side, almost obsessed. Elias felt the pieces falling into place. Dr. Reed, the psychologist who portrayed Vance as a harmless psychopath. Serafina Dubois, the loyal student who continued the murders. And Henderson, pulling strings in the background to bring the truth to light. He decided to visit Dr. Reed again. This time, he wouldn't just question her. He would confront her.
When Elias reappeared at Dr. Evelyn Reed's practice, the receptionist was less surprised than tense. She led him directly into Dr. Reed's office. Dr. Reed sat there, her hands clasped again, a calm smile on her lips. "I heard you found Serafina Dubois, Detective. Congratulations." "You didn't tell me the whole truth, Doctor," Elias said without preamble. "You knew Serafina was a danger, and you knew about Vance's cult, the Students of the Shadow." Dr. Reed nodded slowly. "I studied Julian, Detective. I tried to understand his thoughts, his art." "Or you were a part of it." Her smile froze. "I was an observer, Detective, a researcher. I studied the human psyche and its darkest manifestations." "And you allowed Serafina Dubois and others to become murderers?" "I cannot control my patients' decisions, Detective. I can only try to understand them." "Did you find the note in Vance's file?" She hesitated. "I saw it, yes. Julian had a whole series of such notes. He called them his prophecies." "Prophecies? Or a warning about Serafina?" Dr. Reed was silent. "Who are the others, Doctor? Who are the Students of the Shadow that Serafina mentioned?" She looked at him with her piercing eyes. "They are everywhere, Detective, hidden in society. Artists, musicians, writers, people fascinated by the dark side of life who share Julian's vision. And you encouraged this vision." "I documented it, understood it. It's my scientific mandate." Elias felt a cold anger rising within him. This woman had played with murderers all in the name of science. "You are an accomplice, Doctor." "I am a psychologist, Detective, and I warn you, the echo is not easily caught. It is an idea, a philosophy, and ideas cannot be imprisoned." Elias knew he couldn't prosecute her. Her actions were ethically questionable, but not illegal. He had to find the true successors of the Shadow. He left Dr. Reed's practice feeling that he was facing an invisible enemy, the Students of the Shadow. Who were they? And when would they strike again? He had to find the connections, the patterns, the invisible threads that bound them all together. And he knew that this time he wasn't alone. Henderson was on his side. And perhaps he could reactivate other former colleagues too. The fight against the Echo had just begun. Elias spent the next few weeks pursuing every lead that could take him to the Students of the Shadow. Henderson supported him discreetly, providing access to old files and contacts. They worked in secret, for the danger of the police themselves being infiltrated was real. They discovered that Julian Vance had participated in a secret online community before his death, a forum for artists dedicated to dark art. Their posts were filled with morbid thoughts, philosophical treatises on death and destruction, and hymns of praise for Vance's visionary works. Elias and Henderson delved deep into this forum. They found profiles, pseudonyms. Many of the members were talented but socially isolated artists who'd been drawn in by Vance's charisma. They spoke in codes, used metaphors from the lullaby, "The Shadow Flies by Night." They wrote about completing the symphony and spreading the echo. Elias began analyzing the profiles, looking for patterns. He found geographical locations that repeatedly appeared, places where unsolved deaths had occurred in recent years, resembling the Moreau and Jenkins murders. Strange accidents, disappearances. One profile stood out in particular, the Night Moth. This user was particularly active, posting regularly and seemingly playing a leading role in the community.
The night moth's posts were even more cryptic than the others, full of allusions to secret meetings and rituals. The night moth has understood the true meaning of the echo, another user wrote. He will lead the symphony to its climax. Elias felt a net closing around him. This was bigger than a few murderers. This was a movement, a cult. They uncovered the night moth's real identity. It was Alistair Finch, the son of Arthur Finch, the lawyer who had defended Julian Vance. Elias's heart skipped a beat. The connections were becoming clearer. The lawyer had not only saved his son, but also introduced him to Vance's dark world. Alistair Finch was a respected gallery owner in London, known for his avant-garde exhibitions and his fascination with provocative art. He was a man of influence and connections. Henderson and Elias knew they had to be careful. Finch was powerful, and he wouldn't be easily caught. They shadowed Alistair Finch. He led a seemingly normal life, but Elias noticed the small details. The secret meetings in a remote warehouse, the constant phone calls to unknown numbers. One evening, Elias followed Finch to one of his meetings. The warehouse was dark and secluded, on the end of the Thames. Elias parked his car far away and approached on foot, under the cover of darkness. He crept up to a window and peered inside. The room was sparsely lit. A group of about 20 people sat on a circle on the floor, and in the center stood Alistair Finch, his face illuminated by a strange, manic gleam. He spoke of Julian Vance, of his legacy. He spoke of the lullaby, of the art of death. And then he showed an image projected onto the wall. A sculpture. A gigantic wooden bird. An owl. Its eyes fixed and empty. The same owl Elias had seen at the refuge. "This is our new era," Finch said, his voice echoing in the room. "The symphony of the shadow will engulf the world, and we are the musicians." Elias looked around. He recognized some faces, young artists he'd seen in the online community. And then he saw something that made his blood run cold. In the hands of some of the students were small, carved wooden birds. He had to act, but he couldn't go in alone. He called Henderson.
Henderson arrived with a small, hand-picked team of loyal officers he could trust. They surrounded the warehouse. The night was silent. Only the faint rustle of the Thames could be heard. Elias and Henderson stormed the door. Chaos erupted. The students of the shadow were surprised. Some tried to flee, others resisted. Alistair Finch, his eyes wide with fury and desperation, tried to attack Elias with a heavy piece of wood. Elias dodged, grabbed him, and wrestled him to the ground. Finch cursed, his words incoherent, full of delusions about art and death. The other students were quickly overpowered. The evidence was everywhere: the carved birds, the records of their rituals, their posts on the online forum. Alistair Finch was led away, screaming and cursing. He spoke of the unrelenting beauty of the shadow and that the echo would never be silenced. Back at the police station, they interrogated Finch. He was uncooperative, speaking in riddles and metaphors. He claimed he was only a facilitator, a conductor of the symphony. He revealed no names, no locations. Elias knew Finch was a dangerous man, but he was only part of the web. The lullaby, the echo, it went deeper. Henderson met with Elias later. "We got them, Elias. Finch and his students. The evidence is overwhelming. Finally, we can close the Moreau and Jenkins cases." But Elias shook his head. "It's not over, Henderson. Finch is just another echo. Who is the true initiator? Who really corrupted Julian Vance? Who sang the lullaby first?" Henderson looked at him thoughtfully. "You think there's still someone else?" "I feel it. The echo is too powerful to have been created by just a few fanatic artists. There's someone in the background, pulling the strings, orchestrating the whole thing." He remembered Dr. Evelyn Reed, her cool detachment, her fascination with the dark sides. Henderson, I think Dr. Reed knows more than she told us.
Elias and Henderson went to Dr. Evelyn Reed's practice again. This time, she wasn't protected by her receptionist. The door was open, and a strange silence hung over the elegant building. They found Dr. Reed in her office. She was sitting in her chair, eyes wide open, staring at her desk. Beside her, on a stack of books, lay a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a raven. Its eyes were made of gleaming obsidian. Dr. Reed was dead. A call to the medical examiner confirmed she had died of a heart attack, natural causes. But Elias felt that wasn't the whole story. The scene was too staged. The raven, that was a message. He picked up the raven. It was flawlessly carved, the details astonishing. On the underside of the raven, he discovered a tiny engraving. The shadow dances. The shadow dances, Elias repeated softly. This was a new twist. The lullaby spoke of flying, but dancing? Henderson looked at him worriedly. What does that mean, Elias? Is that another clue? Elias didn't know, but he felt this was the beginning of a new chapter. Dr. Reed's death, the raven, the mysterious inscription, it was all too perfect. He spent the next few days delving into Dr. Reed's life, her research, her patients, her connections. He discovered that she had maintained a close friendship with a respected professor of ancient languages and mythology named Professor Alaric Finch, Arthur Finch's father and Alistair Finch's grandfather. Professor Finch. The name echoed in Elias's head. The Finch family, all interconnected. This was no coincidence. Professor Finch was a reclusive scholar known for his eccentric theories on ancient rituals and secret societies. Elias found out that Professor Finch had given a series of lectures on the mysteries of death in the early 90s, which Julian Vance had attended, and Evelyn Reed, and probably Arthur Finch as well. The source, the origin of the echo. Elias visited Professor Alaric Finch in his old, dilapidated mansion on the outskirts of the city. The house was filled with old books, artifacts, and the smell of dust and decay. Professor Finch was a frail old man with piercing eyes that reminded him of the carved raven's eyes. "Dr. Thorne," Professor Finch said, his voice thin but clear. "I expected you." Elias felt a shiver run down his spine. "You knew I was coming?" "The echo rings far, young man, and you are a master at following it." "You are the shadow, aren't you, Professor?" A faint smile played on his lips. "I am the architect, the artist who composed the symphony. Julian was my student, Seraphina my most gifted student, and my family, they were the executors of my work." "Why, Professor, why all these murders?" "It was art, detective, the ultimate art. Life is fleeting, but death is eternal. I tried to reveal the beauty of death through the sacrifice of innocent souls." "You are a psychopath." Professor Finch laughed softly. "I am a visionary. I have made the world recognize the true nature of existence, the fear, the beauty of decay. The lullaby, the shadow flies by night, its echo will find you. Did you write it?" "It is an old family secret, a prophecy. My family has preserved the art of the shadow for generations, and I have perfected it." "And the raven with Dr. Reed, what does that mean, Professor?" "The raven is the messenger of death. It heralds the end." Evelyn grew weak. She wanted out. She no longer understood the limits of my art. Elias felt a cold anger rise within him. This family had been committing murders for decades, all in the name of a sick art form. "I will stop you, Professor." Professor Finch shook his head.
You won't, detective. The echo is in the hearts and minds of people. It will live on. My symphony is unfinished. Suddenly, Elias heard a sound behind him. He turned around. A figure stood in the doorway. A young woman, with dark eyes that reminded him of Seraphina. In her hand, she held a small, sharp knife. "The nightingale," Professor Finch said softly. "My last student. My most beautiful creation." The nightingale rushed at Elias. He dodged, but she was fast and nimble. The knife glinted in the sparse light. He knew he was in a deadly trap. The shadow was truly dancing, and Elias was the next partner in this macabre dance.
The fight was short and brutal. The nightingale, driven by a fanatical zeal, was a formidable opponent. Her movements were precise and quick, skilled in the use of the knife. Elias dodged, blocked, and tried to find a moment of inattention. He hadn't been in a fight like this in years, and his body, still marked by the strains of recent cases, protested. Professor Finch sat unperturbed in his armchair, observing the spectacle with a strange smile on his lips, as if he were a spectator at a play he had orchestrated himself. The crackling fire in the fireplace was the only sound accompanying the rustle of their movements and the sharp hiss of the knife. Elias realized he couldn't hurt her. He had to subdue her. He used her aggressiveness against her, letting her walk into his blows. A well-placed strike to her wrist sent the knife clattering to the floor. The nightingale cried out, full of anger and desperation. Before she could recover, Anya was on her. She pinned her down with practiced moves, handcuffed her. The nightingale squirmed and cursed, but her resistance was broken. Reinforcements arrived. The police stormed the mansion. Professor Finch was taken from his armchair, his eyes still filled with the same insane gleam. He mumbled incessantly about the symphony of shadows and the eternal dance of death. The nightingale was also led away, still with an expression of triumphant madness on her face. The mansion was searched. They found a wealth of evidence. Diaries full of sick philosophies, detailed records of the murders, sketches of the wooden birds that served as signatures in each case. They also found a secret archive documenting the history of the Finch family over centuries. A long, bloody line of artists of death who operated in secret, perfecting their macabre works. The evidence was overwhelming. Professor Alaric Finch was identified as the mastermind behind the operation, the orchestrator of the murders. His son, Arthur Finch, the lawyer, had acted as his accomplice and protector, covering tracks and shielding his family from prosecution. And Alistair Finch, the gallery owner, had recruited and guided the next generation of students of the shadow. Julian Vance had indeed been a victim, a brilliant but unstable mind, manipulated and driven to madness by Professor Finch. The notes he had left behind were desperate warnings he tried to hide under the influence of his master. Evelyn Reed, the psychologist, had been a fascinated observer who had delved too deeply into the dark world of the Finches and ultimately became a victim herself when she tried to break free. The case was officially closed. The news reported extensively on the arrests and the shocking details of the cult. The public was horrified, fascinated by the idea of a centuries-old family murdering in the shadows. Elias Thorne was hailed as a hero who had revealed the shadow and ended the symphony, but Elias knew it wasn't that simple.
Months later, Elias sat in his small office. The desk was tidy, the piles of files were gone. He had regained his position with the police, this time with newfound respect and recognition. But the calm was deceptive. He flipped through an old book he had found in the Finch mansion. It was a handwritten family ledger documenting generations of artists of death. At the very back, on the last pages, he found a blank page, and then, in different handwriting, a single, almost invisible line: "The echo sleeps, but it waits." It wasn't Professor Finch's handwriting, or Seraphina's, or the Nightingale's. It was another, someone who was still out there, someone who had hidden. Elias felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The Finches were caught, but their legacy, the idea, the symphony of the shadow, it wasn't over. It was dormant, but it waited. The lullaby echoed in his head, this time with a disturbing new meaning. "Sleep, my child, the shadow comes swiftly, the shadow flies by night, its echo will find you." He looked out the window into the encroaching darkness. The city lights twinkled like countless eyes. Somewhere out there, in the shadows, the echo waited. Elias knew his work wasn't done. He had won a battle, but the war was not over. The hunt had just begun.
More years passed. Elias Thorne, now a recognized detective inspector, dedicated his life to pursuing the echo. The arrest of the Finches had sparked a wave of interest in dark art. Suddenly, new followers emerged in forums and on obscure websites, inspired by the Finches' ideologies. It was as if the family's arrest had only made the lullaby resonate louder. Elias built a small, specialized team. He called them the Shadow Hunters. They were a discreet unit within the police, whose sole purpose was to track down the hidden traces of the artists of death. Henderson, now retired, served as an unofficial consultant, a walking encyclopedia of obscure cults and human abysses. The cases they handled were subtle. No more obvious serial murders with carved birds. Instead, they were accidents, suicides that bore small, insignificant details that only a trained eye could recognize. A specific type of carving on an everyday object, a cryptic message hidden in a supposed suicide note, a faint echo in the undercurrents of crime. Elias felt the constant presence of the echo. It was like a ghost moving in the fringes of society, elusive yet always present. The students of the shadow now operated decentrally, without a central leadership. They were a loose collection of fanatics who created their own interpretations of dark art. One day, Elias received a call from a young detective constable named Anya Sharma. She was new to the team and had a talent for noticing the most inconspicuous details. "I have a case here, Detective Inspector," Anya said, her voice excited. "An apparent suicide. A young woman, a music student, found in her apartment. Everything points to suicide, but what, Sharma?" Elias asked. "She had a small music box on her nightstand. A melody plays. It's an old lullaby. The shadow flies by night." Elias felt a cold sting. The lullaby. Again. "Is there anything else, Sharma? Any detail that doesn't fit?" "Yes, she had a small, tiny carving on her palm, a symbol. It looks like a stylized lyre, and next to it a barely visible number. 5. Elias's heart pounded. The lyre. That was the symbol of a group within the cult dedicated to the musical aspects of the lullaby. And the number. That was a count. "Sharma, send me all the case details immediately and don't involve anyone else. This is a shadow case." Elias met with Anya. She was a brilliant young woman, attentive and intuitive. Together, they delved into the case. The student hadn't been alone. She was part of an online group of musicians who dealt with dark music. They experimented with disharmonious sounds, eerie melodies, and lyrics reminiscent of the lullaby. They discovered that the group was led by a talented but deeply disturbed composer named Silas Blackwood. He was a virtuoso known in the underground scene for his unsettling soundscapes. And his music, they found, was based on the old notations they had found in the Finches' family ledger. Silas Blackwood was the new echo. And the number 5 meant that this was the 5th victim he or his group claimed.
The shadow hunters began hunting Silas Blackwood. He was cunning, operating from the shadows, communicating only through encrypted messages and secret meetings. His victims were all musicians, fascinated by his dark vision. He drove them to suicide by exploiting their psychological weaknesses and convincing them that death was the ultimate expression of their art. It was a new, more insidious form of art of death. No more bloodshed. Instead, psychological manipulation that led victims to self-destruction. Elias and Anya followed a trail that led them to an abandoned opera house on the outskirts of the city. It was a huge, dilapidated building that had once been magnificent, but was now just a hollow shell. They entered the opera house. The air was cold and dusty. Light barely penetrated the broken windows, and then they heard it. A melody, dark and dissonant, filled with an eerie beauty. It was Silas Blackwood's Symphony of the Echo. They followed the sound, which led them through the dark corridors. They reached the stage, and there, in the center, stood Silas Blackwood, a shadowy outline in the sparse light. He was conducting an invisible orchestra, his movements fluid and elegant. Around him, on the floor, lay 5 figures, 5 musicians, dead, with carvings on their palms showing the lyre and a number. Silas Blackwood turned as he noticed their presence. His eyes were empty yet filled with a disturbing joy. "Welcome, Detective Thorne," he said, his voice a whisper that echoed in the vast space. "You've come just in time to hear my symphony."
Elias raised his weapon. "Silas Blackwood, you're under arrest." Blackwood chuckled softly, a grating sound that resonated eerily in the silence of the opera house. "Arrested? Oh, detective, I am an artist. My art cannot be imprisoned." He gestured to the 5 bodies on the stage. "These are my masterpieces, the ultimate harmony of life and death." Anya Sharma, her face pale but determined, moved to surround Blackwood. The air was filled with a tense silence, broken only by the faint creak of the old stage and the distant rush of wind through the broken windows. "You drove these people to suicide," Elias said. "You poisoned their souls." Blackwood grinned. "I brought them enlightenment, the realization that true art lies in decay, that the most beautiful melody is the last." He raised his arms as if conducting an orchestra. "Do you hear the echo, detective? It sings the song of freedom." Elias looked into his maniacal eyes. It was the same kind of madness he had seen in Julian Vance and the Finches, a sickness that gnawed at the psyche and turned people into monsters. Blackwood made a sudden move. He snatched an old, broken violin that stood on a stand near him. He raised it like a weapon. "I will finish my symphony!" he screamed, his voice echoing through the opera house, full of madness and despair. Elias knew Blackwood wouldn't hesitate to attack them. Anya drew her weapon. "Put the weapon down, Silas. It's over." Blackwood laughed hysterically. "It's never over, detective. The echo is eternal. It will always find a conductor to complete its symphony." He lunged at Elias, the violin raised like a club. Elias dodged, and Blackwood stumbled over a loose stage board. He fell headlong, the violin shattering into 1,000 pieces beneath him. Before he could recover, Anya was on him. She subdued him with skilled holds, put handcuffs on him. Blackwood struggled and cursed, but his resistance was broken. Reinforcements arrived. The musicians' bodies were recovered. The opera house became a crime scene, searched for every tiny clue. Silas Blackwood was led away, his maniacal laughter still echoing in Elias's ears for a long time. He was another echo, another instrument in the macabre symphony. The arrest of Silas Blackwood was another victory for the Shadow Hunters, but Elias knew it was just another chapter in an endless book. Blackwood had his own small cult following, the Disciples of Dissonance, as they called themselves. They weren't as large or organized as the Finches, but they were dangerous in their own way. Elias and his team spent the next few months tracking the remnants of Blackwood's network. They discovered that Blackwood had been in contact with other artists who were also fascinated by the idea of dark art. It was a web of online forums, secret meetings, and personal connections that stretched across the globe. They found a painter who painted his victims before brutally killing them and then artfully staging their bodies. A poet who drove her victims to suicide by reciting disturbing poems that preyed on their deepest fears and weaknesses. A sculptor who incorporated human bones into his sculptures, calling them trophies of the echo. It was a macabre gallery of madness, driven by the same ideology of the art of death. Elias now understood what Professor Finch had meant when he said, "The echo is in the hearts and minds of people. It will live on." It wasn't an organization in the conventional sense. It was an idea, a virus that spread in the minds of unstable artists. Each of them was an echo, interpreting the original lullaby in their own twisted way. Elias felt tired. He had hunted so many shadows, found so many echoes, but it never seemed to end. Every victory was just a brief respite before the next shadow rose. Anya Sharma, who had proven invaluable, noticed his exhaustion. "You can't find everyone, Detective Inspector," she said one evening as they sat in his office reviewing the latest case files. "We do what we can." "But is it enough, Anya?" Elias asked, his voice hoarse. "How do you fight an idea? How do you kill an echo?" Anya was silent for a moment. Then she said, "We can let the light shine brighter, Detective Inspector. We can enlighten people. We can show that the art of death is nothing but pure, sick madness. We can show that there is beauty in life, even in the darkest moments. And we can honor the victims by telling their stories, by making sure their voices aren't silenced." Elias looked at her. She was right. It wasn't enough to just hunt the shadows. They also had to spread the light. Elias Thorne began to pursue a new strategy. In addition to hunting the students of the shadow hunters launched an information campaign. They worked with psychologists and art historians to explain the origins of dark art and uncover the psychological mechanisms that drove people into this twisted ideology. They spoke with victims who had escaped the influence of the students and helped them process their traumas. They organized exhibitions that celebrated the true beauty of art, in contrast to the cruelty of the art of death. It was a long, arduous process. The fight against an idea was different from the fight against a person. You couldn't arrest or imprison an idea, but you could expose it. You could lessen its appeal. Elias himself became a kind of public figure, speaking at conferences and in television interviews. He told the stories of the victims, exposed the cruelties of the Finches and their followers. He became the voice of light, opposing the echo of the shadow. Years passed. The number of shadow cases decreased. Not because the echo had been silenced, but because it found fewer followers. Public attention, education, the stories of survivors all contributed to the dark art losing its terror. One evening, many years after the Finch case, Elias sat in his office again. He had grown older, his hair was gray, and his face was lined with deep wrinkles. But his eyes were still sharp, his mind still alert. Anya Sharma, now his deputy head, entered. She had matured into a confident, experienced detective. "We've closed another case, Detective Inspector," she said. "A small local cult. They tried to create an artwork of death, but we were fast enough." Elias nodded. "Well done, Anya." "It was a faint echo," Anya said, "barely audible." Elias smiled. "Perhaps they're learning. Perhaps there's hope." He looked at the Finch family ledger lying on his desk, the last handwritten line. The echo sleeps, but it waits. He picked up a pen and wrote a new line below it. But the light is stronger, and it watches. He put the pen down. The thriller wasn't over yet, but the end of the chapter had been reached. He had found his purpose, not just to hunt murderers, but to drive away the shadows that sought to poison the human heart. The wind whistled softly outside the window. It was a whisper, but it was no longer the echo of the shadow. It was the whisper of life, which always continued, even in the darkest night. Elias Thorne knew that the fight would never truly end, but he was ready. He was the shadow hunter, and he would always be there to confront the echo of the shadow.